When I was young, I was crazy about a French boys band, very famous, I'm sure you know, for the French people, To Be Free, maybe you know. And because of their talent, their curiosity, their expertise, their job, their work, and also because they look like to be good friends, today we have with us the To Be Free of the mental preparation. So yes, please welcome to Urban Johnson. He's professor of sports and exercise psychology at the Halmstad University of Sweden. You can come together. David McCarthy, former endurance trainer at the Aspire Foundation Academy, and also Matthew Cullen, candidate at the University of Birmingham. Welcome and thank you. Under your applause, please.
Okay, so my name is Urban Johnson. I'm from Halmstad University, Sweden, and I think I will give the voice to my colleagues also to just say hello.
Good morning. Oh, this one. Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Yeah. Good morning. My name is Matthew Cullen. I've recently finished up working in a performance psychology and culture role at Aspire Academy in Qatar, and I'm just writing up my PhD at the University of Birmingham. Thank you for the invite, Anel and Simon. Great work in putting this together.
Good morning, everyone. My name is David McCarthy. I'm from Ireland, and like Matt, I was recently working as the endurance coach in Aspire Academy just up until this October. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here and good to meet you.
Great. So thank you, everybody, for this invitation. And as you can understand, this is the last thematic concept about the management of uncertainty. And what we will do now is that we will focus on psychological or psychosocial factors that have emerged pre, during, and partly post-COVID, maybe. And we will do this both from a personal experience or case studies, where we will include student athletes, coaches, and staff, but also from an empirical perspective. And one red thread when we talk about student athletes that we will focus on those who are younger, from the age of 13 to approximately 19 years of age. So it's what we call junior athletes. And in the first presentation, which is embedded in a broader project about mental health and well-being among student athletes, we will see some results where we have done research on two phases during the epidemic, which will also come to some lessons learned. And I will start with this presentation and run through some of the literature overview, which we more or less have heard now, because we know that from previously presenters and also from the literature that the COVID situation has certainly brought many aspects to mental life among populations, but not just athletes, but also from a broader perspective. And we know also that when we measure pre and post factors, for instance, physical activity and so on, at least in the initial phase of the COVID period, these figures went down, which also includes stress syndromes and depressive syndromes and so on, even though they have stabilized a little further on the COVID period. Of course, elite athletes were exposed to this as all other persons in the world. And one aspect that we think can have been a good buffering effect is to keep the daily routines that we will come back to in our presentation also. And one group that was especially exposed to this period was student athletes because of the two careers, both the academic and the sport career. And this is what I will focus in the start of the presentation. So we also have said that this situation is like two sides of a coin. It could be a period of wellness and challenges, but it could also lead to mental health problems. And of course, when you look at the COVID situation as a major stressor, people in institutions react quite differently depending on what resources they have to buffer the stress from the COVID situation. And of course, this is a variation between different, what you could say, more adaptive and maladaptive responses, even though these are anchored at definitely the ends of the dimension. And perhaps most people focus on have both good and bad strategies to handle the situation. But what is interesting is that when you look at the literature, basically most of the literature is focusing on the problematic situation of the COVID situation. What we do here in this research, we will try to look at favorable responses. What makes actually student athletes go on and perhaps grow, matured from the situation. And this concept is a little towards the resilience behavior that you can see, for instance, among competitive athletes. And as you can read, there are some well-acquainted definitions of what is a resilience and how it works in life. So, taking this background, we will focus on two research questions. And the first one is about psychosocial factors that characterize those student athletes who actually went through the period in a favorable way. What characterized these persons? And we will also go into the question about lessons learned. What can we learn from these for the future to come? And I know that Dave and Matt will also run into these issues in their presentation. Okay, so in order to answer these two questions, certainly you need a research design or at least an idea of how to capture the experience from the student athletes. And in our case, we set up the design quite early when we knew what was going on. And as in most research, you certainly need ethical approval to do these kind of studies. Like most parts in the world, there was ups and downs in terms of opening school, closing, opening in school, and so on. So our idea was to meet student athletes at the certified sports high schools in the fall. And we were unlucky or maybe lucky, I don't know what you can say, but we had a possibility to meet some of the student athletes in October, but not all of them, because some few days before we would do the second collection of data, well, the government closed everything, so we had no chance to meet them in person, which was problematic. But then it opened up again in late spring, April, May, and we have a possibility to meet the student athletes again. And as you can understand, this is a qualitative design where we actually meet persons and do focus group interviews. So who are the persons? Well, it's student athletes from both individual and team sport. In the first run in the fall, it was students from having golf and handball as their major sport when they entered the sport high school. And as you can see, it's aged between 17 and 19, so it's the late. They have been all acquainted with the period for 1 or 2 years before, so they were in the last grades, basically, before they would eventually enter university or wherever. And in the second phase, we could collect even more data where we added badminton, swimming, and soccer, so we got a bigger group of students here. And what we try to do here is use the methodology of focus group interviews. And why focus group? Well, we think this is a very good way to meet student athletes and have a possibility to ask questions where they can reflect between each other before they deliver an answer to the research leaders. We were always two leaders who led the discussion. And to our opinion, this was a very good way of finding out how the student athletes experienced the the COVID period. We based our theory on a constructed, grounded methodology, which we think was especially suited because there are no really prior research about this situation. How could it be, I would say, about the stressor of COVID? So we used this methodology to gather the data. And as some of you probably know, it means that you transcribe the interviews and then you go back and analyze the answers and try to find relationship between the different statements that the student athletes gives. And we had several hundreds of pages of transcription to run through in the research group. So it has been a quite big work. So what did we find in this study? Well, basically, we can watch this quite simple model in terms that you have the stressor, you have the COVID situation that affected everybody, not least the student athletes. And these elicited different psychosocial responses, or I would say biopsychosocial responses. And in the first period, in October, it was interesting to see what the student expressed as what is characteristic of those who actually managed the situation in a very adaptive or favorable way. And one of the answer was, of course, using your social network, but perhaps more from an instrumental perspective in the first phase of the COVID period, but also management of everyday life and taking care of your body. And many of these student athletes were really overtrained when they come into the COVID situation. So actually, it brought some good points. They could heal their body in one way or another way. So they actually found good characteristic of those who managed the way through the COVID situation. What happened here is that when we do the second interview, some 7 months later, after 14 months after outbreak, you can see that the quotations that I will show you soon and the answer are quite more elaborated in many ways. For instance, when we talk about in-depth social support, means that the student athlete moved from an instrumental to perhaps a more emotional way of engaging people around them, and also saw the consequences of their handling in order to bring this into future experience. We could also see in these student athletes a quite big way of taking responsible of their own situation as being a coach or being a mentor to other persons who perhaps didn't feel so well. So they took a lead in this situation, which is quite interesting in terms of lessons learned, which I will come back to. Okay, so if we look more specifically on the 4 main categories that we captured during the second phase of the collection of data, you can see that we put out 2. The first 2 is about self-awareness of body and soul, and the importance of actually having a physical training to manage your academic studies. So they realized that here is a connection that is quite valuable for them. Even though they, of course, have had ideas of this before, it was manifested quite clearly in the interviews. But also the search for deeper contact, not just the close neighborhood, but also having dialogues with distant colleagues and friends and peers, which make the life more meaningful for them. So we could see a change, and we could also recognize that this was characteristic, our opinion about those who managed it very well. When we come into the last 3 and 4 main categories, we once again looked at this responsibility and problem solving. And as you can read from the quotations, really it signals persons who take charge of something that they were not supposed to take charge of, because they had not really nobody knew that this would come. But in some way, they took the lead and helped other, especially with problem-solving activities, which is, in our opinion, interesting. And it might also signal an maturation that was triggered by the COVID situation. So they actually matured perhaps faster than other ones, those who saw the possibility and challenges of taking care of the situation. And also, of course, a belief in life after the COVID period. And some student athletes also expressed that this is perfect for me because now I know perhaps how I will manage my university studies, where it's very much up to myself, not a coach or a teacher who shows me what to do. So this kind of expression, we think, makes sense when it comes to finding lessons learned for the future. And what do we propose here? Well, first of all, as some of the excellent speakers before us have pointed out, that it's very important to capture the situation and try to make use of what has happened during this last, let's say 1.5 years. Because things could happen in the future, perhaps 1 to 5 years. But to make this, make protocols, make documentations is very valuable. What we do is here that we try to fix recommendations from on three levels: on the student athletes, on the school, and on the municipality level. And of course, on a student athletes level, it's very much about enhancing self-help strategies. And we talked about ACT and mindfulness and so on, which could be a potential self-help strategies for student athletes in these cohorts. But also to make use of mental apps and different constructions that you can find today on the net in a more pronounced way. We are pretty sure that it's extremely important to stimulate peer support system when we come to school level in a more advanced level than that we have now, where the school might also contribute to these. And we know that some of these schools didn't have, for instance, psychologists working at the school, and this probably is something that we have to think about in the future to include in the support team. And of course, having persons who might have education in helping student athletes in both domains. There might be the competence at school, but perhaps the school need to encourage recruitment or further education of their personnel to meet these needs that we think are essential to meet future, for instance, pandemics. And also from a municipality level, it's of course very important to have a collaboration between the student, the school, and the community and the sport federation that is embedded into the different schools. Just final close up here. What we will do in our work here, this is one part of the whole project. We will produce other research also, but hopefully this will come out in journals next year. We are in the phase of just writing together the manuscript. So, okay, I stop here with the first part, and then we will run into Matt and Dave's presentations of their experience and their journeys all the way through the pandemic, before, during, and partly after. So, okay, thank you so far.
Are these working? We just on the topic of uncertainty, we weren't sure if we would stand or sit, but Dave ran 12 miles this morning. I ran a marathon at the weekend, so we're going to sit down and give Urban a chance to relax as well. Okay, so here we go. Okay. So just a little bit about our journey. We're going to speak. I'll speak a little bit more about how I've helped to support staff and coaches. A couple of people have alluded to the point around not just supporting coaches, but wider multidisciplinary support teams, whether that's psychologists, nutritionists, biomechanists, And we've been working in an environment where we have wide multidisciplinary teams. Dave will refer more towards speaking around supporting early adolescence. So Urban spoke a little bit more about working with later adolescents, you're 17 to 19. Dave will speak a little bit more about working with the younger ones. So Dave, do you want to explain how we met?
Yeah, so Matt has been working in Aspire Academy, which is in Doha in Qatar for the last, up until recently, the last 8 years. And it was, I was previously an athlete myself, an endurance runner up until about 2017. And then I felt I had enough of that and I just wanted to get into coaching. And I was lucky enough to get an opportunity to be the endurance coach in Aspire Academy. And prior to heading out there in September 2019, I'd met Matt at the European Cross Country Championships, which were held in Tilburg in the Netherlands in 2018. And Matt, with another endurance coach in Aspire, had brought a few kids to the European Championships just to experience the competition out in this part of the world, the Middle East. They don't get to see sometimes like what they're actually training to do. And so it was a great opportunity for me to meet Matt and meet the kids before I landed there, so it made the transition going there a lot more comfortable. And then the next one is later in the year. We met in Portugal on a training camp as well.
And just, I suppose, Dave first arriving in Qatar in September 2019, when the world was a very different place to what it is now. There was lots going on in your initial start into life in Inspire.
Yeah, so I started in September 2019 and the pandemic hit March. So like my idea of what I was stepping into was soon changed, which obviously there was a lot of adapting going on, but in ways it worked out well, because sometimes when you're stepping into institutes, they have a way of running things, there's routine, there's ways of doing things, and everyone is comfortable. And when you're coming in new, you're trying to adapt to everyone, figure things out. But because the pandemic hit, it changed everything. And so everyone had to become more adaptable. And so then I felt it was easier to integrate.
And just again, prior to the pandemic, like we had some really interesting activities go on out in Doha with the World Athletics Championships. I got to meet David Rudisha in a lift. This was just a few weeks after he'd been in a terrible car accident, but great to see him in good spirits. And I went down and supported a Canadian friend who was out in the marathon, and there's 10, 15 people out along the course, so quite a lonely place. And then the October, November 2019, lots of activities going on, lots of conferences, lots of engaging activities at Aspire. We held an Asia conference where we brought different practitioners from all around Asia to collaborate and learn. And then the Aspire Fellows, I think the top right picture, that's Mauricio Pochettino presenting. That was when he was at Tottenham. Sadly, PSG lost last night to Man City, but hopefully he's in a better space today. So lots going on, and we'll come on to what. And then, December 2019, things again quite normal. In Qatar, the FIFA Club Cup was happening. Dave, you went off to Argentina on travels. January, I was off to Kenya. I dropped off a student athlete, an interesting mission. Just take one athlete, drop him off, spend a few days there, and come back. And then things started to change. We've gone from, face-to-face workshops with coaches, with support staff, coaching in person, to very quickly lockdown. And Dave, do you want to speak a little bit around?
Yeah, so it was a funny time, because as you can see in the photos here, the top right one, we're all out doing a workout together. That's me just coaching from the side of the track, which is what you usually do. We're in the lab getting some sub-max, VO2 max testing done. And then next thing, we're all online and we're training from at home. And running is a type of sport that it's just hard to get better at unless you're running. And, these are young kids, so it's not as if they have habits and routines built up where you can just give them training and they can go out and do it by themselves. They're not going to do anything unless you're there basically holding their hand to do it. And so we had to, it's a school, so obviously they're used to the Zoom calls for classes and that, so we were required then to have coaching training online over Zoom. And so all you can really do like that is what probably most people did during the pandemic, is sort of hit classes online, you know, your little home gym thing and that. And it's good, but you know, that's not what we were training to do. And after a few weeks of that, it gets boring. The routines become repetitive, and you just see the kids' lack of interest. And so this is where they see the saying there, adapt, improvise, overcome, one I took from Conor McGregor when he gets defeated. And it was in that moment where like you just have to make calls and realize that like it's no good doing something just to tick a box. It's no good just having the kids come online and say, yeah, they were there today, we did this. They weren't having fun. And the reality was the pandemic was here and we didn't know how long it was going to be here for. And so I had to, from the coaching side, I had to let go of getting them fitter running and just making sure that they as kids, you know, were happy, were enjoying themselves. And a lot of our online sessions just ended up being chats. It was literally just having fun, catching up, having a bit of, you know, banter. And that at least made them looking forward to coming online. And then also for them to be able to see me saying, you know, we won't train today, we'll do this. So they appreciated that also, like I was looking after their best interest. And for me, I was just trying to keep the energy, the motivation there until the time we got back. So again, it was just a lot of adapting, you know, you're improvising and you're trying to overcome these obstacles that are constantly being thrown at you.
And just sort of, you know, shifting across to some of my work, working with staff here, you know, I was basically asked by the head of squash to help develop an online program during Ramadan. So, you know, in the Middle East, you know, Ramadan, and for a lot of Muslim athletes, it's a very important time of the year. It's not where you kick back and not, you know, train, or you just take your foot off the gas. It's you continue to do the hard work, but it's also a period of reflection. And so the coach wanted us to challenge me to develop something sort of from scratch, based around sort of psychosocial factors. And, you know, we asked the boys what types of things they wanted to do. You know, a lot of autonomy support. And one thing they said, that they wanted to speak to athletes. And we're like, okay, let's think really big. So who can we speak to? Who would you like to speak to? And it's like Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo, Mbappe. And I'm like, okay, all right, who else can we? And they spoke about squash players. And we're like, okay, the squash coach is pretty well connected. I think he was number 4 in the world at one point. And they said Mohamed El Shabaghi. And for those who know squash, I think he is maybe right now still the number 1 squash player in the world. So we were able to reach out to him. We contacted him out of very goodwill. He came online and the guys had a Q&A session. We got them to come up with questions, like one question each. And we asked them to come up with a question that they might not be able to find the answer on the internet. Okay, so they had to be quite creative in that regard. And so the quotes around the outside are some of the things that he said. And they're based around, I sort of framed them around the 5C model that Chris Harwood will speak about later. I won't really engage with this. This is Chris's baby, but just see that little note there. That was 4 years ago at a workshop at Loughborough. I bought Chris's book, and it was to do with the 5Cs, and he wrote a little note in there saying, "Merry Christmas, Matt. Enjoy, you know, sharing these stories in Doha." That was November 2017. November 21, Chris, I did use it, you know, and the guys enjoyed it. The coach was engaged. The boys seemed to get a lot from it, you know, and the fact that they could see these quotes coming from Mohamed El Shabaghi, and then we then delved into, like, what does good commitment look like? You know, what does good concentration look like, or poor concentration? And then, you know, we tapped into some of the work around goal setting and imagery. It was a useful activity. The coaches enjoyed it, as did the student athletes. At a time when we just had to, like, I think as Veronique said earlier, it's about being creative and adapting, and, you know, this very much disrupted our routine. And then from a staff perspective, from March to June, it just so happened that the funding came in. We engaged in an online program. They call it Compete to Create, but I think it could be Finding Your Best as well. It was developed by an American sports psychologist, Michael Gervais. I don't know if you've heard of him, but it's an evidence-based program in the main, and it's almost like a Netflix series. So a new unit comes out each week, and people can go through work around values, around personal philosophy, optimism, trust, the stuff around culture. And every couple of weeks, I'd come together with the staff online, and we'd reflect on what people learned and what people took from these sessions. From one response from one coach was, it's changed my life, pretty profound. Others were like, it's got me into better mindful routines on a morning. So people took different things from it. And we I think it was about 35 people that carried out this program. Dave, you want to speak about this period?
Yeah, so this was again during lockdown phase, March to July. So as you can see, it's that was in front of the buildings there along the beach, where myself and Matt had many walks together when we were able to get out for the few hours in the day. And that's all we had. We weren't going into the academy. The academy was shut down. These are the towers we're living in. And you're out in the country in the Middle East, and you're just living in that tower all day long. While this whole thing is going on. It's not, again, this is within my first year of my first job, moving away. This is not what I expected. But a big important part during this time was people, and having people to chat with and connect with, and if it's even only one or two, for just to be able to go out for a walk and chat. And it's funny, off the back of this and off a lot of the back of the workshops Matt did, I ended up finding that I probably got closer with people I worked with than had I been actually in Aspire Academy every day working, because you're just going in, you're doing your job, routine is there, there's no downtime. And a lot of these workshops online created opportunities for new conversations, tasks we were given that we wouldn't have been given otherwise. And, so I suppose there was a silver lining to everything in it.
And just to give you a bit of context as well, in Qatar, where we were based, 90% of the population are expatriate. So, part of my challenge as well was working with supporting staff who were operating away from their home country and not able to get back home. I mean, like I said, I think one of our colleagues, Australian guy, he's gone home last week for the first time in 2.5 years. He's got like a 2-year-old kid that grandparents have never seen him, so a couple had a child whilst the pandemic was on. So a lot of my conversations were just touching base with different members of staff, little mini conversations on Zoom every sort of half an hour or so in those early months, to just check in and see how people were doing. We had one colleague who literally arrived a week before lockdown, into the country. So real challenging time for many. And Dave, do you want to speak to?
Yeah, so these are just some of the strategies we put in place and the challenges and benefits from them. Strategies is, constant. I'm sure WhatsApp's exploded. You're just trying to keep in contact with the athletes. Zoom calls, whether it's just chats or training sessions, or we'd have quizzes. Matt came up with some quizzes we did with the kids and stuff like that. But a lot of the challenges around this too, again, you just have to go back to the whole thing of what we're trying to do is get ready for sport, and the kids want to compete. So motivation, it was hard to keep kids motivated. Kids like school because they're able to hang around with their friends, and they missed that. There was no one-on-ones, so there was a lot of challenging, no competitions, no time frame as to when this was going to end, no training camps. And again, back to we're in the Middle East here. A lot of what we do is we get out of the country for competitions, we get out of the country for camps. We were in Kenya, we were in Portugal. A lot of the younger kids, as they're going through their earlier years in Aspire, when they hit a certain year, they're expecting they're going to go away on these trips, and now there's no trips, and there's very little competition in the country. So all of that is taken away. So you're left with a real challenge of, from a staff coaching perspective, how do you keep the motivation there? On the positive side of this, it was time kids were able to spend time at home during Ramadan with their families, and that did work well, because sometimes Ramadan isn't always the easiest to work around with school, and then between not eating and then prayer hours, it's a challenge. And then also time to reflect. And I definitely think, you know, kids are thrown into competition at a very young age, and it's always about competing. And we've never in our lives before had this break from whether it was work or competition in order to see things from a different perspective and angle. And I definitely think that brought back a healthier mindset, both in the athletes and in the coaches. And when the competitions did come back, I think they were more hungrier than ever, and kids that maybe would have suffered from nerves and stuff like that when it was taken away from them, they realized that they did want to do it. So they were the benefits from it in the end.
I can't, my eyes are not great to read that one, so I'll just look back at this, sorry a minute. So just thoughts around like psychosocial support strategies for staff. I spoke around a couple related to finding your best and the 5 C's intervention that was both for staff and student athletes in the main. But there was one coach initiated a weekly call with the athletics department where we'd otherwise not have these conversations, like where you speak about a topic of interest. And you know, we developed a weekly gratitude intervention, and yeah, that's probably about it on that front. And then just in terms of like the challenges for staff, things like, you know, pay cuts and job uncertainty, helping reassure people in very uncertain times around that, homeschooling, and just trying to find ways in which to help staff members to prioritize their own mental health and find, you know, prioritize a window of time where they're actually giving it to themselves and, you know, to help recovery. And the benefits, I suppose, an opportunity to develop different professional development activities and develop thoughts of how to work online when people wouldn't have previously been doing that because the work is generally face-to-face. Dave, do you want to speak to?
Yeah, so then December 2020, when things started to open up a little bit more in Qatar, but there was still no traveling abroad. And so there was no training camps, there was no competitions, as I was saying. And the kids, you know, they had nothing to look forward to. So between myself and Matt, we came up with the idea of having a training camp in Qatar. And in December in the Middle East, the weather is perfect. And so we went to a resort, Sea Line, down in the desert where there's loads of sand dunes and that, and it's by the beach where the kids can swim in. So we were able to get the funding to go ahead with that and bring the kids away on a week-long camp down here. And it still provided all the benefits that a camp would. Like, you know, we talk about thinking outside the box. Like, you know, camps serve more of a purpose than just having to be in a certain location in the world. They serve the purpose of being able to spend extended time with each other. And a lot of the time when you're in school or when you're in training, the kids are coming in, they're doing their schoolwork, they're doing the training, and they're gone again. And you're not really getting time with them, getting to know them, getting to figure out or like maybe help certain personalities that need a little bit of, just a bit of nurturing and care and talking in order to, you know, change. We try to change, evolve the fitness. We need to evolve the athlete as well. And that's the importance of these training camps. It's time away. And so we were able to get one of these together, and it was the first actually. It was the first home camp, I think, ever run by Aspire Academy. So no group had ever actually had a training camp in Aspire. And since then, actually, a couple have happened. But it was an opportunity where myself and Matt just came together and were able to do this. And the kids had as much fun as they would have had had they gone, you know, to the likes of Kenya or that. They just wanted to be away, playing a bit of volleyball on the beach, you know, running up and down sand dunes. And it's just, you know, again, these are kids. We're looking to work towards high performance, but we're not at it yet. And in order to get there too, you have to make it attractive and fun. So yeah, we were lucky to get that opportunity.
And then again, just going back to my work with staff, the January to March of this year, we developed something that had never really been done before within the academy. We developed a community of practice of coaches. Dave was one of them. From different sports, different athletics disciplines, where we talk about different topics of interest. You know, I'll touch upon work related to my PhD around empowering coaching that was developed by Professor Joan Duda and her team at the University of Birmingham, around how to embed these autonomy supportive strategies into coaching environments. Another one of the topics that coaches wanted to speak about was about how to make sessions more fun and engaging. So I drew upon some of the work of Amanda Visek around like fun integration theory, which was really well received. You know, we discussed the terminology fun versus enjoyment, and it just gave a framework for coaches to think, okay, well, this is how I can make a session engaging or fun, and it just gave them a little reference point, and that was really useful. And then the March to July, this is when I sort of picked up, you know, moving into some of my PhD work. Dave was involved in some of the work there, and it was focused around the motivational climate in elite sport. So, but using the empowering coaching framework, which sort of leans into achievement goal theory and self-determination theory, and this was all remote. So again, this is pretty new for me. I'm developing this workshop with Professor Joan Duda and working through interviews with coaches to sort of ascertain like what was the impact of the empowering coaching workshop itself. So again, just some of the thoughts around the climate, the motivational climate created by the coaches, is related to, you know, the psychological ABC, so autonomy, belonging, and competence, and competence being related to also how you sort of judge success. Do you judge it in a sort of task or an ego-focused way? And again, looking at the potential psychological and performance outcomes of developing these psychologically adaptive environments. So performance and personal development, well-being, enjoyment, and continued participation. So what I'm going to do is refer to like the third study in my thesis. So I interviewed 9 coaches of elite athletes. Coaches were from the US, from England, from Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. And let's just have a look here. Okay. Yeah, so this is the third study here. So the coaches went through the empowering coaching training, and then the research questions were, what did coaches understand and learn from engaging in the workshop, and how did coaches change or enhance in their coaching as a result of the training? So I carried out a thematic reflective analysis of the interview data of the 9 coaches, and the themes that were generated on the back of the interviews were as follows. So coach reflections facilitated understanding of the empowering coaching principles, keeping the ABCs front and center. So coaches were actually intentional in thinking about the psychosocial environment that they were developing. Whereas previously, you know, their coaches are often thinking about the X's and O's. It's like, what's the session, how many reps and sets, etc. And the positive athlete outcomes as a result of developing such an environment. Can you guys see this okay? Yeah? And how did coaches change or enhance in their coaching as a result of the training? So let me just see here. So training provided space to reflect and change their practice. There's a greater care beyond the track. There's more autonomy support in coaches' thoughts around how much freedom, or how much, not just freedom as in complete autonomy, but autonomy with structure, and improvement in their quality of communication. And yeah, so the fourth study focused on going a bit deeper into these empowering coaching principles. So we'd meet up on a fortnightly basis over a 3-month period with the coaches to ask coaches to reflect on their challenges and opportunities in becoming more empowering as a coach. And here's just a few that I've not done a full analysis yet on this study, but here's just a few coaches' quotes. So the overarching thing is, and this isn't me just throwing it away, one coach said, but it has made me a better coach, which is fundamentally what we're trying to do right. I think we should continue to do this every single month. So this was only meant to happen from like March to July. The whole workshop from top to bottom was a great idea, and the information was very informative. I've seen a change in my attitude to how I coach and how I can be a better coach to give more decision-making qualities within the process. And this was a coach of a 3-time Olympian who this coach had never previously given much in terms of autonomy support and decision-making opportunity for their athletes. And yeah, just to finish on this slide here, so this community practice was only meant to run until July, but the coach is like, let's keep it going, like we're really interested in doing this. And Dave's involved in this, and we've got coaches from youth level through university sport in the UK to the NCAA Division 1 schools to pro teams in the UK and the US. And this was a session we just had recently where, you know, a few themes that came out from this session. But it's good to see that they value it and they want to keep it going. That hopefully indicates that it's of value. So, thank you, I think.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions? Yeah.
Good morning, Stéphane Lisi, mental coach on basketball especially. So thank you so much for sharing your great international experience. And it's very interesting to see that even Nordics country like you, with a big experience in a mental health approach, is still sharing their experience, but getting also experience for others countries. My question is about, the maturation of this, field in France, especially. What kind of advice you can give us for our consultants or mental health consultants to convince, coaches to involve them or their approach in this mental health approach? Thank you.
So to convince coaches to maybe engage with mental training, again, it comes down to relationships. Like if you can find a coach that you can build and engage a good quality relationship. For example, myself and David, we got to know, okay, we're fortunate. We got to know each other for a year before he started. He knows the ins and outs of my philosophy, his, and gives me space and time in his coaching environment. And just find ways to have small wins. I think, who spoke earlier about, Veronica, I think she spoke about getting 15 minutes at the start of a session, just finding like that little window where you can have a little bit of impact and show that something works. I was speaking to Alberto Chai last night, and he spoke about just like a small 30-second or 1 minute, breathing intervention at the start of a practice, and then asking for some feedback on that. And it doesn't, I think probably earlier in my career, I was thinking you got to sit down with a group for 30 minutes and you've got to do a workshop, and it's just, and I'm still like, I know a very small amount right now. I'm 41, that's why I went back to university, but yeah, just find ways to get small wins. And again, ask the coach, like, what would you like us to work on? Put it back to them, so, what problems are they dealing with, or what opportunities? And then you might not have all the answers, but you can then go away and research it and try something out and be creative and try and find a way to develop a novel answer. Don't know if that answers your question. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Mr. Johnson said how much the resilience was improved with self-help strategies. And my question is for you first. Could you give us some examples? And my second question will be for Mr. McCarthy and Mr. Cullen. Which were the most prominent strategies, self-help strategies, you met with during your experiments?
Okay, so I can start with the first question, which if I understood it right, how much of resilience was developed during the period from the outbreak to basically May 2021. Well, what we could see from the quotes and from the discussion is that some student athletes really took the chance to, in our opinion, mature quite rapidly. And if you want to run into psychosocial developmental theories, for instance, if you use Erik Erikson's idea of different very important situation in life, and one such a turning point is around 16, 17, 18, when you go from isolation to intimacy. And what we could see from some student athletes was that they really took the chance to use their own skills and be coach of themselves. And this was especially evident in team sports, because in Sweden, if you play soccer and handball in January, it's not possible to do that because it's quite cold and dark and so on. So you actually had to train yourself. And in this respect, I think the turning points in this very vulnerable age of 17, 18, 19 years was one of the maturation phases that put those who saw the possibility to develop by themselves really got a push during the period. So I think the turning points are one of the key issues, that you see the challenges and you see the possibilities. And we could extract that from the quotations 7 to 14 months, that things have happened, at least to these students that were in our study. But it's a quite tricky process to capture changes over time. And of course, we cannot run into cause and effect the discussion here, but we could see signs that show that these really took the chance to be their own coaches and be their own teachers in life, because they literally did not get any instruction from very few persons.
So your question was around self-help strategies during the pandemic. Yeah, I suppose one thing that does come to mind that I wasn't good at early on was around boundary setting, like setting, more like personally with friends, because I don't know if anyone can resonate. Who had a Zoom quiz at some point? Anyone? Was that just me? I had friends like from overseas saying, can we connect and do a quiz online? And I had all these requests in the first couple of months of like friends I'd not seen for like months or sometimes years. And it was great to engage in some of them, but it got to a point where I'm like, actually that's sort of enough. I had to I learned to say no to certain things. And also just with working with staff and coaches to actually sometimes actually say, well, no, I need to take a break myself. And, I do a walk or a sunset run daily. In the Middle East, we were blessed with good weather, sometimes too hot from May, June onwards. But it would be running, movement.
Thank you. Maybe one last question, because you will need time for lunch. Very important. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for your presentation. Maybe a last question to David. As a trainer, what did you learn about yourself and your practice? And maybe what will you change for your future missions?
Yeah, so I think some of the biggest things I've learned from a coaching perspective, especially during the pandemic, is reflection and, adaptability. We always, as coaches, make out this big plan of how we want things to go, and it doesn't always go that way at all. And so I've become just better at being able to adapt, and now even though my coaching career is still short, I still look back and it's constantly changing and constantly evolving. And although I have an idea, I'm like, I think sus now, I know that I'll be doing things differently next year going forward. And I don't think it's about what you're doing. I think it's always just about being in that moment and what's best for the people in front of you as well. But a big thing through the workshops that Matt did as well too is, which has been a big help, is in a coaching environment, you can have a lot of people around you. You can have a lot of athletes and you can have a lot of support staff, but sometimes there's only one coach. And so you're not interacting maybe enough with people who are doing exactly what you're doing. So the workshops that Matt has been able to provide, from coaches coaching in the American collegiate system to coaches that are coaching Olympic world-class athletes. From a coaching perspective, the biggest thing you're always thinking of is the training. What's the best type of training? And the more and more you look around and see what's happening, there's no secret workout. It's just it's the whole holistic picture. And when you're talking with people who are in the same field as you, and you see that even when we're on these Zoom calls, and the same questions and doubts that are going through my mind as a young coach are still going through the mind of a coach who has an athlete making the Olympic final. And so it's just given me confidence to realize too that when you're in a competitive environment like sport, you're never where you want to be because you're always trying to be better. And that's okay. And then to get comfortable with that and just, yeah, I suppose just ride that wave.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Urban, David, Matthew, thank you very much.